the raw ambience of a medieval tavern. Stepping into a medieval tavern was a full sensory immersion, unlike anything we'd encounter today. The air itself was a pungent cocktail, a heavy blend of unwashed bodies, spilled ale, and an unsettling, indefinable stench of decay. This wasn't merely background noise. It was an active participant in the atmosphere, constantly reminding patrons of the raw, unrefined nature of their surroundings. Beneath your feet, the floors were notoriously sticky, often covered with straw or rushes. Meant to absorb spills, this organic layer rarely got changed, becoming a filthy sponge for mud, drinks, and vomit. Every step would squish, a grim testament to the lack of hygiene. The furniture was equally basic, rough, makeshift tables fashioned from wooden planks set on barrels, or wobbly three-legged stools. Comfort was irrelevant. Durability in a boisterous, often rowdy environment was paramount. Lighting was deliberately dim, provided by flickering tallow candles or simple wick lamps. This wasn't just due to limited technology. The gloom served a practical purpose by concealing the pervasive dirt and stains that adorned every surface, making the grim reality of the space slightly more tolerable. The noise was relentless. Taverns buzzed with a cacophony of loud bargaining, drunken singing, and the jarring sounds of breaking furniture or glassware from frequent brawls. This overwhelming din underscored the tavern's role as a vibrant social hub where inhibitions were low and passions often ran high. Most taverns featured a simple layout, a single, large common room centered around a hearth or open fire. Smoke from this fire would typically escape through a hole in the thatched roof, often leaving the interior perpetually hazy. In larger establishments, a second story might offer rudimentary sleeping quarters. Finally, barrels of ale and wine weren't hidden away, but lined the walls, providing both easy access and a surprising degree of insulation, all while adding to the tavern's distinctive visual and aromatic landscape. A cross-section of society, the diverse clientele of medieval taverns. The medieval tavern, far more than just a place to quench a thirst, was a vibrant social nexus, a microcosm reflecting the rich tapestry of society at the time. It was a melting pot where all walks of life, from the lowliest laborer to the occasional nobleman, converged, each bringing their own purpose and narrative to the boisterous, often smoky, atmosphere. Laborers undoubtedly formed the largest segment of the tavern's patrons. After a long, arduous day toiling in the fields or plying their trades, they sought the tavern as a familiar haven. Here, they found not only warmth from the central hearth, but also an affordable escape from the day's strains, a chance to unwind with cheap ale and foster camaraderie with their fellow workers. For them, the tavern was an indispensable part of daily existence, a ritualistic end to a hard day. Merchants ingeniously transformed the tavern into an unofficial, bustling office. Lacking dedicated commercial spaces, they would conduct their business at the rough wooden tables, negotiating deals, exchanging vital information on goods and prices, and discussing travel routes. The clinking of coins being exchanged and the lively haggling were common sounds in the tavern's corners, turning the establishment into a dynamic mini-marketplace. Intriguingly, even clerics were regular patrons, often despite ecclesiastical admonitions against drunkenness. In fact, many monasteries themselves owned and operated taverns, viewing them as a significant source of income. This highlights how deeply ingrained the tavern was in community life, transcending conventional moral boundaries, even for those dedicated to spiritual pursuits. Knights and soldiers were also frequent faces, particularly when traveling between military duties or participating in tournaments. Taverns provided essential lodging, a place to rest, prepare for upcoming journeys, or simply seek entertainment after intense periods of service. Their presence could occasionally add a tense edge to the atmosphere, but also served as a valuable source of news from beyond the local village. Occasionally, members of the nobility would grace these establishments, especially younger aristocrats. For them, frequenting these noisy, sometimes disreputable public places might have been a way to seek a sense of roughing it, or to experience a different facet of life outside the confines of their castles. Their appearance often drew attention, creating a unique and sometimes unexpected social blend. Women were present in taverns, though primarily in roles such as servers or proprietors. In many instances, widows would inherit and run their husbands' taverns, showcasing their significant role in the medieval economy. A smaller number of women might attend as patrons, but these were usually isolated cases or for specific, clear purposes. Travelers, encompassing pilgrims, envoys, and peddlers, relied heavily on taverns. These were crucial stopping points along long routes, offering essential shelter, food, drink, and perhaps most importantly, a hub for information exchange. Here, they could gather news, seek travel companions, or simply share tales of their journeys, connecting distant places through shared experiences. Even physicians occasionally plied their trade within the tavern walls, performing minor procedures or prescribing remedies for those in need. Their presence transformed a section of the tavern into a makeshift clinic, underscoring the multifaceted role these venues played in the community. Similarly, clerks, the literate members of society, found taverns an ideal setting for networking, allowing them to engage with both their social superiors and inferiors. Finally, taverns bore witness to remarkably poignant shifts in emotion. Funeral parties often made a stop there after burials. What began as a solemn and subdued gathering, after a few rounds of ale, frequently transformed into a boisterous and sometimes chaotic assembly, a communal way to cope with grief and reinforce community bonds. In essence, the medieval tavern was a vibrant social tapestry, a true cross-section of society where every class intersected, creating a vivid tableau of human life, work, and leisure in an age long past. The culinary landscape of a medieval tavern, simple fare and dubious quality. The gastronomic offerings of a medieval tavern were a far cry from the diverse menus of today, driven by necessity, ingenuity, and often a healthy dose of suspicion. Survival, not culinary delight, was the primary goal, and this was vividly reflected in both the food and drink available. At the heart of the medieval tavern's kitchen was the pottage, a thick, hearty stew. This was the ultimate improvisation, a concoction made from whatever ingredients were available, simmered in the same pot for days on end. This continuous cooking process meant that each spoonful was a blend of flavors, old and new, a testament to resourcefulness and the need to minimize waste. The quality of meat served was often questionable. Laws existed to prohibit meat of unknown origin, yet practices like mincing were common, conveniently disguising the true nature of the protein. Meat pies were a ubiquitous and popular choice. Their thick, hard crust served a dual purpose. They were primarily a sturdy, edible container for the filling, often referred to as mystery meat, due to its unidentifiable contents. These pies were a practical, portable meal, ideal for travelers or those eating on the go. To extend the shelf life of ingredients and mask any less than fresh odors, preservation techniques like salting, smoking, and pickling were extensively used. These methods were crucial for making spoiled or, past its prime, meat palatable, often with the liberal use of strong spices to further disguise any unpleasant flavors. Bread was a staple, typically thick, dark, and often stale. It wasn't just for eating. Stale bread slices, known as trenchers, served as makeshift plates, absorbing juices from the food. Once the meal was finished, these trenchers were either given to the poor or fed to animals, embodying a practical approach to waste. Cheese, often hard and long-lasting, was another common offering, though its quality varied wildly depending on the producer and region. Eggs stood out as a relatively reliable and safer source of protein, less prone to spoilage compared to meat. Fruits and vegetables were seasonal luxuries, usually served cooked rather than raw due to prevailing concerns about disease and impurities in uncooked produce. Portion sizes were generally smaller than what we're accustomed to today, a reflection of the scarcity of food. Curiously, salty foods were frequently served, a deliberate tactic to encourage patrons to drink more and thus boost the tavern's profits. When it came to drinks, ale and beer reigned supreme. These beverages were typically brewed on-site, resulting in a murky, less carbonated, and generally lower alcohol product compared to modern beers. Unlike water, which was rarely served due to concerns about disease, the brewing process killed off most harmful bacteria. Ale was considered a safe and nutritious alternative. Wine was also available, though its quality could vary wildly, from fine imported vintages to rough, local ferments. In certain regions, mead, honey wine, and cider, fermented apple juice, offered additional choices. Despite laws and penalties, diluting drinks was a common practice among unscrupulous tavern keepers, aiming to stretch their supply and maximize profits. This often led to disputes and complaints from patrons, adding another layer of challenge to the medieval tavern experience. In essence, the food and drink of a medieval tavern were defined by pragmatism, scarcity, and a constant battle against spoilage. While certainly not gourmet, these offerings sustained communities and fueled the vibrant social life that made taverns such an indispensable part of the medieval world. Entertainment and activities, the lively pulse of a medieval tavern. Beyond being mere eating and drinking establishments, medieval taverns pulsed with a vibrant energy, serving as crucial centers for entertainment and social activity. For many, these smoky, raucous halls were the primary venues for leisure, offering a medley of diversions that ranged from games of chance to spontaneous brawls. Perhaps the most ubiquitous form of entertainment was gambling. Taverns were hotbeds for wagers of all kinds, with dice games like hazard being immensely popular. The clatter of dice, the shouts of players, and the nervous energy of onlookers would have been a constant backdrop. Board games, referred to simply as tables, which included early forms of chess and checkers, also provided intellectual challenge and opportunities for betting. These games weren't just for passing time. They were avenues for excitement, risk, and the quick transfer of coin, often leading to heated arguments and, as we'll see, worse. Beyond organized games, the spirit of competition often manifested in impromptu contests. These weren't formal, pre-planned events but spontaneous challenges that could erupt at any moment. Patrons might engage in tests of strength, such as arm wrestling or lifting heavy objects, or compete in feats of endurance. Perhaps the most legendary, and certainly the most perilous, were the drinking contests, where revelers would vie to outdrink one another. Such challenges invariably drew eager spectators and, more importantly, numerous bets, fueling the tavern's lively atmosphere and adding to its chaotic charm. For those seeking more structured amusement, music and storytelling were integral to the tavern experience. Minstrels, itinerant musicians and entertainers, would wander from town to town, finding their most receptive audiences in taverns. They brought with them songs, ballads, and instrumental pieces, captivating patrons with their performances. Similarly, professional storytellers would weave tales of heroism, romance, and adventure, often for the price of a meal, a few drinks, and a place to sleep. These artists served as vital purveyors of news, gossip, and cultural narratives, binding communities together through shared artistic experiences. Dancing, though perhaps less frequent than gambling or storytelling, certainly occurred. Medieval dancing in taverns wasn't the refined, choreographed waltz of later eras. Instead, it was energetic, spontaneous, and often quite suggestive. Fueled by ale and loosening inhibitions, patrons might break into lively jigs or communal dances, their movements uninhibited and raw. This aspect of tavern life undoubtedly added to its reputation as a place of revelry and occasional impropriety. For lonely travelers, or those simply seeking companionship, some taverns offered the services of companions. While the exact nature of these arrangements could vary, they generally implied providing company, conversation, and sometimes more intimate services to solitary guests. This was a discreet, yet recognized, part of the tavern's offerings, catering to the needs of a mobile population far from home. However, amidst all the revelry and companionship, there was an ever-present undercurrent of danger. Brawls were incredibly common within tavern walls, often erupting from trivial disagreements, drunken misunderstandings, or unpaid gambling debts. Unlike modern fights, these altercations quickly escalated, with participants grabbing whatever was at hand, mugs, chairs, even broken table legs, to use as weapons. The narrow spaces, dim lighting, and ready supply of blunt objects made taverns particularly perilous settings for conflicts, turning spontaneous fun into sudden, brutal violence. These frequent fights underscored the rough-and-tumble nature of medieval society and the often unpredictable environment of its social hubs. In essence, medieval taverns were dynamic stages where life unfolded in all its raw, unvarnished glory. They were places of escape, entertainment, and connection, but also of potential peril, reflecting the robust and often turbulent spirit of the age. Regulation and payment. The attempt to tame the medieval tavern. While medieval taverns were vibrant hubs of social activity and entertainment, they were also often hotbeds of disorder. This inherent chaos prompted authorities to implement various regulations in an attempt to maintain some semblance of order and control. However, enforcing these rules in a period before modern policing was a constant challenge, often resulting in creative deterrence and the hiring of rough-and-ready enforcers. One of the most common regulations was the curfew. Most towns and cities required taverns to close their doors at a specific, designated hour, typically after sunset or by a certain chime of the church bells. This was an attempt to reduce nighttime crime, brawls, and general public disturbances. However, evading the curfew was a popular pastime for many patrons and proprietors, often leading to surreptitious late-night gatherings. Authorities also tried to impose drinking restrictions. Laws sometimes attempted to limit the amount of ale or wine an individual could purchase, hoping to curb excessive drunkenness. In practice, these laws were largely ineffective. The desire to drink was strong, and tavern keepers, keen to maximize profits, often found ways around such rules, making enforcement a futile endeavor for the sparse official oversight. Given the frequency of brawls, it's no surprise that most towns enacted rules prohibiting serious weapons within tavern walls. While a small dagger might be tolerated, larger swords, axes, or other dangerous implements were generally unwelcome, at least officially. This was a measure aimed at reducing the lethality of disputes, though it didn't prevent improvised weaponry from being used in the heat of the moment. Perhaps the most consistent and often effective regulation revolved around price control. The price of ale, a staple of the medieval diet, was frequently regulated to prevent gouging and ensure accessibility. Dedicated officials, known as ale conners, were appointed to inspect the quality and measure of the ale, as well as to verify that it was sold at the legally mandated price. These officials played a crucial role in protecting consumers and maintaining fairness in a vital part of the economy. A rudimentary licensing system was also in place, indicating which establishments had official permission to operate. One common method of signifying a licensed tavern was the ale stake, a pole extending from the building, often adorned with a bush or a wisp of straw. This visual cue served as an early form of a public license, letting potential patrons know that the establishment was recognized, at least to some extent, by local authorities. To manage the inevitable unruly behavior, some tavern keepers, or even local authorities, employed ruffians or strong-arms. These were essentially bouncers or enforcers, hired to physically handle disruptive patrons. Their methods were often direct and unrefined, relying on intimidation and brute force to maintain a semblance of order amidst the chaos. They were a necessary, if unsavory, part of the tavern ecosystem, providing a deterrent where official law enforcement was stretched thin. When rules were broken, various punishments awaited offenders. Fines were a common penalty for minor infractions. For more serious or repeated transgressions, public humiliation was a favored deterrent. Offenders might find themselves in the stocks or pillory, exposed to the ridicule and rotten produce of the community. In some regions, more unique and degrading penalties existed, such as the drunkard's cloak, a barrel worn by the inebriated offender, forcing them to parade through the streets as a public spectacle, a visual warning to others. These punishments, though harsh by modern standards, reflected the social norms of the time and the authorities' attempts to impose order in a lively, often unruly environment. The human engine of the medieval tavern, staffing and management. The bustling, often chaotic world of a medieval tavern relied heavily on its dedicated, hard-working staff, each playing a crucial role in its daily operations. From the top-tier innkeeper to the often beleaguered serving staff and the creative kitchen crew, these individuals navigated a demanding environment, managing not just the business, but also the volatile human element that filled their halls. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the innkeeper. This wasn't merely a proprietor. The innkeeper was a multifaceted figure, embodying roles that ranged from shrewd entrepreneur and canny diplomat to formidable bouncer. Their responsibilities were extensive and varied, demanding a unique blend of skills. Foremost among these was the ability to resolve disputes, a daily occurrence in an establishment fueled by alcohol and diverse personalities. Whether it was a disagreement over a gambling debt, a perceived insult, or a territorial clash, the innkeeper was expected to mediate, often requiring significant social intelligence and a commanding presence. When mediation failed, they were frequently compelled to physically intervene in brawls, putting themselves directly in harm's way to restore order. Beyond conflict resolution, the innkeeper was the ultimate financial manager, overseeing all aspects of the tavern's accounts, purchasing supplies, and ensuring profitability. Their authority was considerable, granting them broad decision-making power over everything from pricing to patron exclusion. The success, or failure, of a medieval tavern rested squarely on the innkeeper's shoulders. Just below the innkeeper, and perhaps the most visible face of the tavern, were the serving staff. These were predominantly young women, a common practice across medieval Europe, leveraging their youth and perceived charm to navigate the often rough clientele. Their duties went far beyond simply bringing food and drink to tables. They were also tasked with crowd control, attempting to keep order among boisterous or drunken patrons, a challenge that often tested their patience and resolve. A critical part of their job was collecting debts, as bar tabs, often recorded on notched tally sticks, were a common payment method. This required a keen memory to track who owed what, and a certain assertiveness to ensure payment. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of their work was dealing with harassment, a sadly common occurrence given the environment. Despite the demanding nature of their roles, their wages were typically low, often supplemented by tips or, for some, other less official services offered to lonely travelers. To excel, a server needed not only a good memory for orders and debts, but also a degree of physical strength and resilience to endure the long hours and challenging interactions. Operating in perhaps the most challenging physical environment were the kitchen staff. Medieval tavern kitchens were notoriously hot, smoky, and dangerous places, where burns and injuries were a regular occurrence. Working with primitive tools over open flames, often preparing food for dozens of impatient customers simultaneously, created immense pressure. Despite these grim conditions, kitchen workers developed remarkable efficiency, a testament to their skill and endurance. Creativity defined tavern cooking. Kitchen staff had to become masters of transformation, taking whatever ingredients were available, which were often of questionable quality or nearing spoilage, and somehow turning them into something customers would willingly consume. This required deep knowledge of preservation techniques, like salting and smoking, a deft hand with spices to mask off flavors, and clever presentation methods to make humble ingredients seem more appetizing. Indeed, a surviving tavern kitchen inventory lists spice powders to improve meat past its prime as a standard supply item. Unsurprisingly, the relationship between the kitchen staff and servers often became strained during busy periods, with surviving complaints describing heated arguments where cooks threatened servers for rushing them. Yet, despite these tensions, both teams had to work together closely, especially when dealing with customer complaints about food quality or slow service. For patrons navigating this complex social ecosystem, a simple, yet perhaps the wisest, piece of advice for any medieval tavern goer was this: be nice to the staff. Customers who treated servers and other staff members respectfully received better service, often found themselves with more generous portions, and perhaps most importantly, were assured of unadulterated food and drink. Conversely, those who chose to abuse staff might find their ale suspiciously watery, their food mysteriously cold, or their meals prepared with considerably less attention to cleanliness. Medieval accounts frequently mention tavern staff taking quiet revenge on rude customers. One particularly obnoxious patron, who mocked a server's appearance, was given ale from the bottom of the barrel, where the dregs and the occasional dead mouse settled. Another account describes kitchen workers spitting in the food of a notorious bully before serving it with excessive politeness. For all their hardships and the inherent dangers of their profession, medieval tavern workers often formed tight-knit communities. They protected each other from dangerous customers, covered for each other during illnesses, and frequently socialized together after closing hours. Many tavern staff lived on-site, creating family-like bonds, It's also impressive that, on occasion, workers would collectively testify to defend each other from accusations or provide support to injured colleagues who could no longer work. Their loyalty to one another was a testament to the harsh realities and shared experiences of working in these vital, yet challenging, medieval establishments. The unspoken rules of the medieval tavern: respect, revenge, and resilience. In the bustling, often raucous environment of a medieval tavern, an unwritten code dictated much of the interaction between patrons and staff. For any medieval traveler or local, the wisest piece of advice was simple: be nice to the staff. This wasn't merely about politeness. It was a pragmatic approach to ensuring a pleasant, and crucially, safe experience. Customers who treated servers, cooks, and the innkeeper with respect were often rewarded with tangibly better service, more generous portions, and perhaps most importantly, could rest assured their food and drink remained unadulterated. A good relationship with the staff meant smoother service, quicker refills, and a generally more welcoming atmosphere. Conversely, the consequences of rudeness could be swift, subtle, and profoundly unpleasant. Those who chose to abuse staff might find themselves on the receiving end of a very specific form of quiet revenge. Imagine your ale arriving suspiciously watery, your food mysteriously cold, or your entire meal prepared with considerably less attention to cleanliness than one might desire. Medieval accounts are rife with examples of tavern staff finding creative ways to retaliate against obnoxious patrons. One particularly egregious case describes an obnoxious customer who mocked a server's appearance being deliberately served ale from the very bottom of the barrel, where the unappetizing dregs and, occasionally, a dead mouse had settled. Another chilling account details kitchen workers spitting in the food of a notorious bully before serving it to him with an air of exaggerated politeness, a truly vile act of defiance. These acts of passive aggression, while unsavory, highlight the precarious position of tavern staff and their silent power over a patron's experience. Despite the often harsh working conditions and the demanding nature of their roles, tavern workers were not isolated figures. Instead, they often formed tight-knit communities. This camaraderie was born out of shared hardship and a mutual need for support. They protected each other from dangerous or overly aggressive customers, stood in for one another during illnesses, and frequently socialized together after the tavern doors closed for the night. Many tavern staff, particularly those who were unattached, lived on-site, further fostering these family-like bonds. This collective spirit extended to more serious situations. There are impressive accounts of workers collectively testifying in court to defend each other from accusations or banding together to support injured colleagues who could no longer work. This deep sense of community provided a vital safety net and emotional support system in a profession that was both physically taxing and socially challenging. The bonds forged within the tavern often transcended mere collegiality, becoming a lifeline in a turbulent medieval world. Regional styles, safety measures, and the enduring legacy of the medieval tavern. Navigating the medieval world as a traveler was a perilous endeavor, and choosing a safe lodging often meant the difference between life and death. Beyond general guidelines, the very regional style of a tavern significantly influenced its safety considerations, alongside various precautions travelers learned to employ. The medieval tavern, far from being a static institution, underwent a gradual transformation, leaving behind a profound and surprisingly consistent legacy that echoes in modern drinking establishments. Regional tavern styles and safety measures. The architecture and operational style of taverns varied across medieval Europe, directly impacting the level of safety they offered. In England, taverns typically featured open common rooms, where most customers remained visible to one another. This layout, promoting a sense of shared space and natural oversight, was generally considered safer than the alternative. Conversely, in parts of France and Germany, the private room model was more common. While offering greater privacy, this arrangement meant travelers could easily find themselves isolated and vulnerable, making them easier targets for robbery or other nefarious activities. Scandinavian establishments presented another unique safety challenge, often building sleeping areas as separate structures from the drinking spaces. This increased the security risk for patrons who had to move between buildings after dark, especially after a few rounds of ale. The tavern's location also played a critical role in its perceived safety. City taverns, while offering greater anonymity, also tended to attract more criminal elements. The sheer volume of people and the transient nature of urban populations made them fertile ground for thieves and tricksters. In stark contrast, village establishments provided less privacy but benefited immensely from tight-knit communities where strangers were instantly recognizable. The watchful eyes of locals often served as a deterrent to misconduct. Perhaps the most dangerous reputation belonged to coastal taverns near ports. These establishments attracted a particularly transient and often disreputable clientele of sailors and traders, many of whom might commit crimes and then simply disappear to sea, making them incredibly difficult to apprehend. A 15th century saying starkly warned, "Trust a mountain tavern before a harbor tavern, and trust your own tent before either." For those prioritizing safety above all else, religious establishments offered the most secure option. Many monasteries maintained travelers' hospices that, while basic, provided secure lodging. These religious houses didn't serve ale to the general public, but they often provided travelers with food and drink as part of their charitable mission. For guests, this represented the best option for safety, though it typically required donations and participation in religious observances. Alternatively, for individuals with status or connections, private homes provided an excellent way to bypass public taverns entirely. Merchants with guild connections, for instance, often stayed with fellow guild members when traveling, benefiting from established networks of trust. Similarly, nobles could expect hospitality from other aristocratic houses, with letters of introduction facilitating these arrangements. When forced to stay in an uncertain establishment, experienced travelers employed various precautions. These included physically blocking doorways with furniture, sleeping fully clothed with valuables concealed underneath, or even taking turns keeping watch throughout the night. A particularly cautious German merchant in 1432 even described traveling with a small dog trained to bark at anyone approaching while he slept, an ingenious early medieval alarm system, highlighting the constant vigilance required to ensure survival. The transformation and enduring legacy of the medieval tavern. Despite all these dangers and precautions, the medieval tavern's reign eventually shifted, not disappearing overnight, but gradually transforming through a series of profound social, economic, and regulatory changes that began in the late medieval period and accelerated during the Renaissance and early modern era. One of the most significant changes was the innovation in brewing. The introduction of hops in the 15th and 16th centuries revolutionized beer making. While traditional medieval ale spoiled quickly, hop beer remained drinkable for much longer. This innovation allowed for larger-scale production and distribution, shifting the industry from local alewives brewing small batches to commercial operations supplying multiple establishments. By 1500, specialized breweries were emerging across Europe, separating brewing from serving for the first time in many regions. Architecture and hygiene evolved significantly as taverns transitioned into early modern public houses. The traditional open hall, with a central hearth, gave way to more compartmentalized spaces, with separate rooms for different activities or social classes. Chimneys replaced open fires, dramatically improving air quality. Windows expanded in size, bringing in more natural light as glass became more affordable. Sanitation standards improved through both regulation and changing cultural expectations. By the mid-16th century, many European towns enacted ordinances requiring tavern keepers to regularly clean their premises. The infamous floor rushes, traditionally left unchanged for months, were gradually replaced with wooden floors that could be scrubbed. A Bristol regulation, for instance, required tavern floors to be washed weekly and specified that no establishment shall allow human waste to remain within view of patrons. Basic but significant progress. Food and drink service became more formalized and regulated. The medieval practice of serving whatever was available in a communal pot evolved toward fixed menus with standardized offerings. Health authorities began inspecting food more regularly, particularly in larger cities. Drinking vessels also underwent their own revolution. The communal wooden or earthenware cups of medieval taverns gradually gave way to individual glass vessels. While expensive at first, Glass drinking vessels became increasingly common throughout the 16th century, not only improving the drinking experience, but also making it harder to conceal dirt or poor-quality drinks. Social regulation increased significantly as authorities asserted greater control over public spaces. The relatively permissive medieval approach gave way to more structured rules governing opening hours, permissible activities, and acceptable behavior. Gaming restrictions became more comprehensive and better enforced. Sleeping accommodations also improved dramatically as dedicated inns began to separate from drinking establishments, leading to clear distinctions between drinking houses and lodging houses by the early 17th century. The clientele itself changed, with coffee houses emerging in the 17th century attracting merchants and professionals, pushing traditional taverns to serve a narrower demographic and leading to more class-stratified establishments. Licensing systems became more comprehensive and effective, bringing previously unregulated businesses under official oversight. This specialization created distinct categories of drinking establishments: alehouses, beer; taverns, wine and food; and inns, accommodation, reflecting increasing government control and consumer sophistication. Despite all these transformations, the social function these establishments served remains surprisingly consistent across the centuries. Look around any busy pub on a Friday night, and you'll spot behaviors that would make a medieval tavern-goer feel right at home. The DNA of those chaotic, smelly medieval taverns survives in surprising ways. The concept of the regular seat, where certain patrons have unofficial ownership of specific spots, dates directly to medieval times, with court records showing physical fights over preferred bench positions. The communal, round-buying ritual practiced in pubs worldwide is pure medieval tradition, evolving from a practical solution in an economy short on coins into a powerful social custom. Bar tabs themselves carry forward medieval economic arrangements of trust-based credit, and even the unpaid debt continues a grand medieval tradition. The physical act of raising glasses in a toast connects directly to medieval drinking customs, where early drinkers would clash cups forcefully, sloshing liquid to demonstrate clean, untampered drinks, a medieval poison detection ritual. Our tendency to discuss sensitive matters over drinks perpetuates the tavern's historical function as an information exchange. Even drinking games maintain medieval lineage, with records describing elaborate medieval drinking contests. Perhaps most fundamentally, we've inherited the tavern's central social function, creating a third place that's neither home nor workplace. Medieval communities gathered in taverns to celebrate, mourn, and mark holidays, finding neutral ground where social boundaries relaxed and community bonds strengthened. Today's neighborhood pub still serves this essential purpose. The medieval tavern's most enduring legacy might be its language. Terms like bar, taproom, and even pub itself, shortened from public house, all originated in medieval drinking establishments. So, next time you're enjoying your local pub, spare a thought for those medieval predecessors. The traditions you're participating in have survived centuries of social change precisely because they satisfy something fundamental in human nature: our need to occasionally escape everyday pressures in the company of others, preferably with something intoxicating in hand.